The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my honor to be able to present the legislation which I hope will govern the Foreign Service for the next generation and beyond. But first, I would like to join you in your expressions of goodwill and support for Paula Tynes, who is very ill, and to certainly pray and wish for a speedy recovery. She is a great help to her husband, and they are always a pair together. As recently as Saturday evening, they were together for the annual Christmas tree lighting in Fox Hill, where she and he are essentially co-chairs for the Fox Hill Festival Committee. And so it was quite a shock to hear that she's ill, and we pray for her recovery. Her husband, of course, is the chief clerk of the House, Mr. Maurice Tynes. I'd also, Mr. Speaker, like to express to the family of the late, now late Lawrence Clinton, former senator for the Free National Movement, with whom I served in the Senate between the years 1992 and 1997. Mr. Clinton was also a constituent, Fox Hill constituency, and I spoke to his cousin, who expects to receive his instruments this afternoon for the appointment as High Commissioner to India, to express my condolences to the family. He is the son, of course, of the late Althea Mortimer, who was a well-known civic activist and trained many people and many young women in the business of secretarial work in the old days. But I always had a good relationship with Lawrence, and he was a strong supporter of the opposition, but notwithstanding that, we found common cause in our support for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So may he rest in peace. The news has also come, Mr. Speaker, that the MP for Elizabeth is to demit office as a minister of the government. And I did not want the moment to pass without expressing my thanks and appreciation for the years which he has spent in public life. And he's pledged to continue from the backbench. You know, public service, Mr. Speaker, is quite a difficult thing. And I don't want people to put more on this than it is. He's explained that it is an economic decision, and everyone in this House should understand that. I want to use the opportunity in saying thanks to him for his work to remind us again that, in my view, we have inherited a broken system where MPs are hobbled in their work, and it needs fixing. Unfortunately, in this climate, there's no support for it. So we may live and leave yet another generation disabled by having to give public service, left impecunious and down on their luck in death if we do not fix it. And I only say to him, it is a rare thing to be a son serving in your father's footsteps, and I wish you well. I'd like to begin, Mr. Speaker, as I often do with a story. Somewhere around 1976, in the run-up to the 1977 campaign, the Honourable George Smith, who was then one of the members of Parliament for Exuma, took me on a house-to-house visit in the settlement of Stewart Manor in Exuma. And we sat down in this very humble abode in this man's living room. And the man said something like this: "You all have asked me to do everything for you. And I have given you my entire support. I gave you all the votes of my children, and my wife votes for you, as I have done at every election. And all I ask is for you to fix the road in Stewart Manor." And he said, "Mr. Smith, I want to ask you, what more is it you want me to do?" And that was a moment that I've never forgotten, because it's the essence of what the contract between the voter and the leaders or the elected official is, to be able to provide the goods and services of government. We have in the gallery this morning the next generation of leaders of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I think that those officers who have been waiting for a long time for this to happen, and are entitled to say, what more do you want us to do? Many of the people who serve overseas, Mr. Speaker, are fast going into penury. I think the allowances which the people who serve overseas are being paid have not been adjusted since the 90s. And you have a situation where, for example, the head of mission in Geneva is making less money than the woman who works for her as her secretary. And you have situations where people are having to supplement the rent where they have to pay out of their own pockets, because the allowances do not fully support how they have to live, where they live and serve overseas. Those of us who remember the late L.B. Johnson, who served as this country's first ambassador to the United Nations and to Washington simultaneously, would remember how reduced his circumstances were when he returned to the Bahamas after serving in this job as ambassador. So yeah, you know, you had the car and the house and the people saluting you all around the place. But you come back with your pockets empty. And no one, in my view, I made the point about Parliament, but no one, in my view, who's called upon to serve this country in its foreign service ought to face the prospect of being broke because you served overseas. At the funeral of George Stewart, who was the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Pericles Malis, who at the time we became independent, was working in the Attorney General's office. he made the point in a statement about the establishment of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of which George Stewart was a key individual, that people had the impression that when the British packed up and left and said, here's your independence, that everything was neat and clean. They handed us a nice package and said, here it is, go be independent, do well. Well, the flag came down, our flag went up. And in the Ministry of External Affairs, as it was then, Pericles Mela says, there was no procedure, no rules, no nothing. They had to all make it up from scratch. As junior officers, they created the Ministry of External Affairs, which ultimately became the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I believe, in under Paul Adley in 1983, I'm reminded. So this ministry is a creation of a whole set of pioneers. And the group that's sitting in the gallery today will have the responsibility, not too far from now, I imagine, but certainly within a generation, to take foreign affairs to the next stage. What is a foreign minister's job, Mr. Speaker? Yesterday, we were in Cuba and had the opportunity to have a bilateral meeting with the Haitian government, and we expect the Haitian foreign minister to be here shortly. And we are watching political events in Haiti, and there appears to be fast-breaking political developments there with unrest on the streets in Haiti once more. We also had a good meeting with the President of Cuba yesterday, led by the Right Honourable Prime Minister. And as I told the press yesterday, an interesting bit of history was told to us about the sinking of the Flamingo from the other side. First, the President of Cuba said that he was deeply ashamed and embarrassed by the tragic mistake that was made with the sinking of the Flamingo in 1980. He explained how events unfolded and why, and said that he was always embarrassed by that tragic error made by Cuba. And he apologized to the Prime Minister personally, notwithstanding the formal apologies that have been made by Cuba on that matter. So what Foreign Affairs does, Mr. Speaker, is it fosters good neighborliness, and it facilitates the seamless movement of Bahamians around the world, whether for travel or for business. And the ministry has done a good job throughout the history of this country's independence in fostering good relations with all countries around us. Certainly with the United States, our main trading and commercial partner, and the country with whom we have with the closest ties. And right now we are in the business of securing our borders. National security, both inside and from outside threats, is job number one. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to our neighbors to have a country with secure borders. This bill, in fact, creates for the first time a foreign service. The Foreign Service in this legislation is not quite separate from the public service, but this is a carve-out of the public service. And I believed that after struggling with this for ages and years, we needed to make a stab at this. And so we are here today. And today, I'm proud to move the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Bill 2014, which proposes to do what its long title says, and that is to provide for the continuation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the continuation of the Minister of Foreign Affairs as a corporation sole, the establishment of a Department of Foreign Affairs, the appointment of a Department of Foreign of a Director General, the administration and regulation of the Foreign Service, and the repeal of Chapter 24 and connected matters. So today, we're seeking to pass this bill to create a Foreign Service for the first time as a discrete part of the public service, with its own rules, promotion procedures, and governance, and the allowance and benefits to which diplomats are entitled when they serve overseas or at home. It creates some landmarks. The Foreign Service, in Clause 6, is a disciplined force, and therefore is not subject to the strictures of the labor laws of the country as it relates to industrial action. It creates a Department of Foreign Affairs for the first time in Clause 7, and the Office of the Director General. It establishes in Clause 10 a Foreign Service Committee in Clause 10, which committee is to advise the Permanent Secretary and the Prime Minister and the Public Service Commission on grievances, disciplinary actions, and the appeals process in relation to an appointment and review remuneration and allowances. In Clause 11 and Clause 12, the Governor General is empowered to make regulations governing the Foreign Service to be known as Foreign Service Orders. And we have circulated the draft orders, and we've also circulated the draft visa rules. In Clause 14, the Minister may make regulations for the issuance of visas. And I'm hoping that we can bring the visa rules into force on the 1st of February. There will be some slight delay with the coming into force of the Foreign Service orders because the Senate has to pass this legislation before the orders can come into force. And the general powers and duties of the Director General are laid out in the schedule pursuant to Clause 7.6 of the bill. Now, one of the main ones I want to point to, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that the Director General is going to have the responsibility under Clause 7.6 to manage and organize the professional development of Foreign Service officers. Because what has happened is no one, once you get hired into the Foreign Service, there's not enough attention paid to the forward progress of someone's career through the system. The rules now presently provide that there's a rotation within the ministry for 2 years, and then you serve overseas. And we want to be sure that all of those deadlines are met, that when the 2 years is up, you actually get to serve overseas, that people don't go overseas and stay overseas for too long, that they come back so their careers are not jeopardized by the fact that they're out of the home country for too long, that their promotion prospects are monitored, and that someone is speaking to them about career and professional development, which will lead to their forward progress on the job. Because one assumes that any Foreign Service officer at the entry level wants ultimately to become an ambassador or Director General or Permanent Secretary, perhaps even minister at some point. But of course, as minister, you have to go into the realm of politics. But at least on the inside of the ministry itself, the top jobs ought to be available for you, and there ought to be a career path which leads you to that job. The interesting thing that I really like about these orders is that the orders also create, for the first time, Foreign Service medals. Almost every foreign service around the world has a discrete set of medals which it bestows on people who give exemplary service in the Foreign Service. If, for example, you are a British diplomat and you happen to be in a place where the Queen visits, when the Queen leaves, you get a knighthood for being the ambassador who was serving when she came, or some other one of the honors which they have, the honors personal to the sovereign. The Americans also have Foreign Service medals. So if you look at Regulation 90, Foreign Service medals are being created as a mechanism to help reward people who have given exemplary service. And the Foreign Service medals are listed as the Lyndon Pindling Medal for Leadership, the Distinguished Foreign Service Medal, the Paul Adderley Medal for Excellence, Clement Maynard Medal for Innovation, the Janet Bostrick Medal for Women in the Foreign Service, and the Foreign Service Bravery Medal. And the initial awards have gone to Mr. Andrew McKinney for the Lyndon Pindling Medal for Leadership, the Distinguished Foreign Service Medal to Marilyn Zonical, a retired Foreign Service officer, the Paul Adderley Medal for Excellence to Sharon Brennan Haylock, who serves in the FAO in the United Nations, the Clement Maynard Medal to Mr. Carlton Wright, who is a retired ambassador, and the Janet Bostrick Medal to Dr. Patricia Rogers, who is the retired permanent secretary, and the Foreign Service Medal for Bravery to Sergeant Michelet Marinard of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and Ms. Janet Turnquest, who is a Foreign Service officer. And I wish to congratulate them and to say that I hope that other officers will aspire to the receipt of these medals in due course. In moving the bill, I would like to give a brief history of how this has come about and to thank those generally and some specifically for who were responsible for making this possible. And I should also address briefly some of the financial implications of the bill and the coming into force of the orders. I hope also to address some of the, if there's sufficient time, some of the foreign affairs issues of the day. The story of these Foreign Service orders begins way back in 1989, when the late Paul Adderley was the minister. And a lot of work has been done since that day to bring it to this day. And I wish to pay tribute to all of my predecessors who served in this office. I want to thank the Permanent Secretary, Philip Miller, who is sitting in the gallery, for his leadership in bringing this to its conclusion. And he was joined by a team of young officers, all of whom I believe are in their 20s, who crafted the initial drafts. There were senior officers who joined them. And there was a reason I wanted the younger officers involved, Mr. Speaker, is because I wanted them to design these orders, because these are the orders that are going to serve them and their careers into the future. So they are, in fact, setting the professional rules that will govern themselves and the generation after them. So if you want to put it in a selfish way, when they're subject to these rules in 30 years, don't blame me, because you wrote it. Just joking. The names of the people who worked on the current version are the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Freddie Tucker, First Assistant Secretary, Eugene Newry, First Assistant Secretary, Kerry Bonamy, First Assistant Secretary, Frank Davis, and Deputy Chief of Mission, Chet Nemore. The core team of the Foreign Service orders comprised Assistant Secretary Acting Chrissy Hanna, Administrative Cadet Marjorie Julian, and Administrative Cadet Mikhail Bullard. So I want to thank them all for their work on these orders. The former Ministers of Foreign Affairs or External Affairs, the Right Honourable Sir Lyndon Pinling, Minister of External Affairs from 1969 to 1973. Senator the Honourable Paul L. Adderley, who was the Minister of External Affairs and Attorney General from 1973 to 83, and Minister of Foreign Affairs alone from 1983 to 1984. The Honourable Clement T. Maynard, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Tourism, and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1984 to 1989, and Minister of Foreign Affairs again and Public Personnel from 1990 to 1992. The Honourable Edward Charles Carter, Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1989 to 1990. Sir Orville Turnquest, Deputy Prime Minister, Attorney General, and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 92 to 94. The Honourable Janet Bostwick, Attorney General and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1994 to 2002. Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2001 to 2002. Honourable T. Brent Simonet, Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2007 to 2012. And I am the last in the present line. As a political party, we pledge to bring Foreign Service orders into being. The Charter for Governance highlights that the government, the PLP, will introduce, and I quote, Foreign Service orders and establish a Foreign Service Commission for the professional development of the Bahamas Foreign Service. Introduce a sustained recruitment and training program in Foreign Service to attract the brightest and best the nation has to offer through the establishment of a School of Politics and International Affairs at the University of the Bahamas. Establish a balance between the appointment of political and career ambassadors and heads of mission to ensure the professional development and promotion availability of career Foreign Service officers. At present, the Bahamas has 12 overseas missions. The Bahamas Embassy in Washington, D.C., the Bahamas Consular Annex in Washington, D.C., the Embassy in Havana, Cuba, the Embassy in Port-au-Prince, the Embassy in Beijing, China, the High Commission in London, the High Commission in Ottawa, the Permanent Mission to the United Nations, the Bahamas Consulate in New York, the Bahamas Consul General in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Permanent Mission to the UN and other international organizations, including the WTO in Geneva, Switzerland. We also have a number of non-resident high commissioners in the House, and he will speak to the matter of the bill later as the Member of Parliament for South Andros, who serves as our High Commissioner to CARICOM and to all CARICOM states. Part of the political team in the ministry is the Parliamentary Secretary, the Member of Parliament for South Beach, who will second the bill. We have announced the ambassador to FAO, who is Dr. Godfrey Eneas, the ambassador to UNESCO, who is Dr. Elwood Donaldson, and he also serves as non-resident ambassador to Japan. And we've announced the ambassador non-resident to the Vatican, Mr. Sean McQueenie, and the High Commissioner non-resident to India, Mr. Lowell Mortimer. In keeping with the government's mandate in the Charter for Governance, the missions in Beijing and Geneva are headed by career Foreign Service officers. Now, I wish to just discuss why the bill is structured the way it is, because the Charter for Governance did say that we were going to create a Foreign Service Commission. First, I believe the lawyers told us the Foreign Service Commission would require constitutional amendment. Secondly, we could not have a completely discrete, our advice was that we could not have a discrete commission which was carved out completely from the central government, that constitutionally the Foreign Service was always a part of the realm itself and therefore had to be tied to the public service. So the advice was, in these circumstances, to carve out a position where those who are contracted to the Foreign Service are governed by a special set of rules which apply only to them, so long as they serve in the Foreign Service. And as a contractual position, the Foreign Service orders are an adjunct to their existing contract. One of the things that will happen, because I understand in the meeting that certain suggestions were made by opposition members yesterday, is a holdover clause is to be put in the Foreign Service orders so that people agree to be governed by these additions to their contract. And they will have a period of time, as, for example, they did with the Public Hospitals Authority, to decide whether they wish to be governed by these or simply rely on the general public service. But if you look at the orders, they also say that no one should suffer any detriment as a result of these changes. And where there are differences, then the higher benefit obtains and not the lesser. It is proposed that the bill come into force within the month. The calculation of the additional costs for bringing into force the new allowances will be some $2 million in costs. These costs were anticipated and are already budgeted. Work was done with the Ministry of Finance, who were part of the negotiations. And as I indicated at the start, people have been living below standard, and some are suffering tremendously, and these allowances have not been adjusted since the 1990s. So I think that the Foreign Service orders are overdue and welcomed, and I believe that all of the Foreign Service officers are looking with great anticipation for these coming into force. And I started that story where I said, the man said to George Smith, "What more is it you want us to do?" And I say to all of us who are in public life that one of the foremost aspects of my work as an executive is concerned is I remember very well what it is like to be 20 or 21, 22, 23, and to have someone have complete control over your forward direction and career, and what it feels like to be treated with disrespect because you happen to be a young person. And one of the things I'd like to do is to not have that associated in any way with my conduct as an executive. That if the rules say at the end of 2 years you're supposed to have an opportunity, then the rules should be followed. And people should have a transparent system for their career forward movement. And that it is important for that to be done with respect for all people and all individuals. Mr. Speaker, One of the other important aspects of this will be the question of the visa rules. I said that Foreign Affairs is supposed to provide a seamless experience for Bahamians crossing borders, whether for tourism or business. And visa rules are currently utilized by the country, but they're not actual regulations that anybody can see. What was left to us was a set of practices and conventions which the British left to us, and there have been various amendments and rules added to them, but they've never been structured in one document as a set of regulations. So the idea is now to put them in a structured set of regulations. There are also going to be some increases in the visa fees to actually reflect the cost of the new technology which is being utilized for visas. The present request and processing is based on a compendium of policies and common practices, and the only actual regulations are the visa fees, which have been in existence since 1989. So this will set the stage for new developments in visas, and the objective of having these regulations is to formalize and harmonize the acceptance, processing, approval, denial, and appeals process involved in issuing visas, and additionally ensuring that a standard visa application form will be used by all entities of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs imbued with the authority of visa issuance, such as its embassies and consulates abroad. So hopefully this brings this process to be more transparent and more efficient. And I'm proposing that the rules come into force on the 1st of February. Mr. Speaker, the role of Foreign Affairs I touched on briefly at the start. And it would be, this provides a good opportunity to see what we actually do. Because right now, as we are working internally on the security of our borders, there is a lot of back and forth in the country about this, the domestic policies which are being pursued with regard to immigration. And this is affecting, or can affect, put it that way, the reputation of the Bahamas abroad. Someone sent me a note yesterday to say there was a picture attached, and in the picture it purports that to show that someone had been abused, they said, by a public official in one of these immigration checks. And in the note they said, before this matter goes to the international press, I would like to come and discuss this to see if this can be avoided. Now, I guess most people in here know me. And let me put it as calmly as I can with regard to this stuff.
Please.
This society is an open and transparent society.
Yes.
Anyone who has a complaint against any public official or any public act has the right to find redress in any number of fora in this country. One is the press, both domestic or international. Another is the courts. Another is the police force, or you can complain to the agency itself. In each case, the institutions of this country will address those complaints and see to it that the individual finds some justice or redress as a result of those complaints. That's the system we have. It's the one we grew up with. It has served us well. I have found no fault in it. And I don't want people to think that there's any kind of bargaining or blackmail or threat or anything that is connected with this. I don't want to get connected in any way with trying to suppress anyone's perceived right to seek redress.
Right.
So I'm not bargaining on that point. Similarly, we had a situation, Mr. Speaker, where this country was attacked overseas by a state legislator in Florida. The Consul General in Miami had noticed that there was going to be a press conference called by this individual, and she proposed to make certain statements with regard to the Bahamas. As the Consul General, he reached out to her office, seeking to set the record straight before the press conference took place. He was ignored. The press conference went ahead. And at the press conference, there was a call for a boycott of the Bahamas. After the press conference, a letter was then written saying, not a request, demanding a meeting with the Consul General, saying, I'm bringing 5 people with me, and I want to have a meeting with you to discuss the human rights policies of the Bahamas and the deportation of children, etc., a long list. And he told her, in response to that letter, when you withdraw the statements you have made, which are defamatory and slanderous of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, we can then talk about a meeting, but not a minute before. And then I added she could go fly a kite. Mr. Speaker, inside the country, one of the critics of the policy, and again, this goes to reputation again, and I wonder if people are really serious. They say they're Bahamians, they support the Bahamas, and then get up and say that the Department of Immigration in the Bahamas is engaged in ethnic cleansing. Do we know what ethnic cleansing is? Do we know what ethnic cleansing is? Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity. That's right. And an activist, because he takes issue with a particular policy, gets up and says the Department of Immigration is involved in ethnic cleansing? I mean, this is madness. And then to stand up in the airport speaking to me and say, oh, I may have gone a little too far, or I may have mistaken things, so I might apologize, or I might withdraw it.
Hell will freeze. Say it. Let's write on the lip.
Mr. Speaker, I simply said, you can reach out to me, but before you reach out to me, withdraw the allegation against the Department of Immigration that they are involved in ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
The problem is that when you make these statements, there are people around who write human rights reports. They don't know the Bahamas from Adam. All they know is, QC gets up and says, ethnic cleansing in the Bahamas, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, some report is being written, uncritically accepted, and we know the damage these uncritically accepted reports have caused to us and our personnel. I mean, how can people be engaged in this? And all we announced on the 1st of November is nothing dramatic, nothing revolutionary.
Repeat it.
Administrative measures. Administrative measures. You have to have the passport of your nationality, and you have to have something which shows that you have the right to live and work in the Bahamas. What's the issue with that? What is the issue with that? And then I made the point, Mr. Speaker, that People forget that before 2007, I believe the Minister of Tourism reminded me, before 2007, you could come into the Bahamas with your driver's license if you were an American or a Canadian. Your driver's license. But all of that is out of the window now. Everybody has to have a passport. Everyone has to have a passport. All of a sudden now, the three political parties, up until yesterday, then they became two. But the three political parties said, Lord, I have to laugh, you know.
I know you would up.
Yeah. See, and it isn't about politics.
No.
Politics ends at the border. Okay? Politics ends at the border.
The Bahamas.
The three political parties said, look, on this issue of our sovereignty and protecting the border, we are united. It said that up to the point at which those statements were issued, the information which was provided was that the Immigration Department had conducted themselves with professionalism. The three parties said that. So you know that didn't last as long as Patty in the Army. Because the next thing you had was a plethora of stories in the newspaper. Oh, this abuse happened, that abuse happened, the next abuse happened, so on and so forth. Now, there are two sides. And as I say, you have a right to put whatever side you want to put, if that's your side, your truth. You know, there's a movie by Kurosawa, the Japanese director, called Rashomon, about a fight which takes place in the jungle, and three people are watching it, and each of the three people have a different story about what happened. So all I'm saying is there are two sides, at least, to the story. And you cannot accept uncritically, or you should not accept uncritically, the assertions of one side. But every complaint which is brought to the Department of Immigration will be investigated and the results will be made known. And if people are dissatisfied with that, there are other institutions in the Bahamas that can deal with their dissatisfaction. Suffice it to say, again, that every day immigration officers are briefed that the standard for their exercise of their powers is this: reasonable suspicion. That's what the Constitution says. You must have a reasonable suspicion. And, you know, this business of standing up in an airport, Department of Immigration is bringing in people from who have been arrested from Bimini. There were 13 of them being brought in from Bimini, Chinese nationals. They were found, I'm advised, in preparation to be smuggled to the United States with a large amount of cash on them. They're brought back. Unfortunately, because of the way things done, these people are passing through the airport. And then someone who is an officer of the court determines that this is a time for gamesmanship, shooting photographs of the operation going on. And then says, oh, I've been assaulted, I've been back, because someone says, look, stop taking the photographs. And he thinks it's a game. He thinks it's fun. I mean, we're engaged in a serious business here, not gamesmanship, and foolishness. You have people, and the passions on this, Mr. Speaker, cut both sides. You have some people who called me as minister and said, look, man, this country is gone. These people have taken over. And what you're doing is trying desperately to get our country back. That's one side. The other side is the human rights issue. Why are you pushing these people out? Why are you treating them so unfairly? The interesting thing about the people who made the complaints in the newspaper, all of them admit without exception, they are in the Bahamas illegally. That's not an excuse for us to treat them badly or inhumanely, but Mr. Speaker, I submit with every fiber in my being that as far as the information I have, no detainee in this country has been abused by sanction of the Bahamas government. No detainee has been abused by sanction of the Bahamas government. And I can't speak, you can't speak for people's individual conduct. Those who infringe or break the laws in any way, they will meet justice and will bear the penalty. But the state is not associated in any way with that. And we've worked with all of our neighbors to make sure that our reputation is intact, that we have proceeded with this with equanimity, that we're not trying to target any particular group. And I'm going to say something which is quite difficult. Yeah, difficult. Because I keep saying to people, I'm not the Minister of Sociology, I'm the Minister for Immigration. You know. Yeah, social services. Yeah. This book here has what my views are, my personal views are on citizenship of the Bahamas, what it means to be citizen. But my personal views in this matter have nothing to do with the law and the framework of the law which now exists and which has to be enforced as humanely as possible. The framers of the Constitution created a situation where you are not Bahamian at birth unless your parents are Bahamian. And the situation we're now trying to solve, Mr. Speaker, is to allow those people who today have no status in the Bahamas. No status in the Bahamas. People live here from 0 to 18 with no status in the Bahamas. This situation is trying to resolve that. And we have a responsibility to our neighbors and ourselves to know who is here and who has the right to be here so that we have a secure country. That's all we're trying to do. Hey, you know, all this noise. But what I was saying is that the stock and trade of many activists, Mr. Speaker, is to create victimhood. Create victimhood, I believe, in some circumstances where it isn't necessary. Because if you create victimhood, then the answer to that will be the policy sags and the executive loses the will to continue. Secondly, it is to provoke an overreaction. And I've told, this is classic civil disobedience tactics. That is to provoke the executive to do something which is so excessive in response to it that, again, it causes the policy to sag because you lose the public confidence. And I've spoken to the enforcement officers and I've said, look, never mind the adulation which you now see from the public. One small thing that you do could tip the balance against the policy. So at all times, you are not to be provoked. You are to act right down the middle. Follow the rules, treat people with respect, be humane. That is what you have to do. That's what the Bahamas is about. Nothing more, nothing less. And I would also say this, Mr. Speaker, and this is the difficult part. Haiti defeated the army of Napoleon in 1804. They paid a terrible price for their independence. All the dislocations we're seeing now. I think they had to pay the equivalent of $90 billion to the French to get their freedom. Enormous sums, and the country never recovered from it. Never recovered from it. But this is the country of Christophe, Toussaint, and Dessalines. And people who are of Haitian descent in this country should not be hiding the fact that they're Haitian. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with being Haitian. Just like I'm proud of being Bahamian, you be proud of who you are. And that's the issue here, is to avoid self-negation, to be proud of who you are. And this is not targeted at any group or group of people. Just be proud of who you are. And anyone who becomes a citizen of the Bahamas, you are a citizen of the Bahamas. And be loyal and faithful to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That's all we ask. And I want to urge Bahamians, all of us, to understand the delicate balance which obtains in the country, and to avoid extremes on either side. Next week, on the 16th of the month, I'm to speak to the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States to discuss these policies. I got a letter from the Secretary General of the Organization of American States to say that notwithstanding the newspaper reports throughout the Caribbean that he had made certain pronouncements on these policies, he had made no such pronouncement. That he merely said that he had a concern from the reports which he saw in the newspapers. And so the idea is to go up and explain the same things that I've said here to this House, and to meet with the CARICOM caucus with regard to explaining to them. There's been a delegation from Jamaica. The Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came from Jamaica to meet and discuss with them, so that they could discuss and understand what the policies mean. So I think, Mr. Speaker, on balance and in summary, we have a good group of well-trained officers in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They deserve our support. You know, very often the only thing we associate with foreign affairs is when you lose your passport, or if your visa gets canceled, or you're crossing the border somewhere and someone calls you up and says, my God, I'm in Hong Kong and I'm trying to get to Indonesia and I don't have a visa. How do I do it? So Foreign Affairs is a ministry that very often operates, at least in the interface with the public, on the margins. And what it does is it sets up relationships so that when that individual Bahamian makes that call, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs knows which button to push and who to call to get the problem solved. And I'm sorry, you know, one of the harder parts of the job is going to the cocktail parties, but, you know, I'll take that with, take the good with the bad. You know?
Very difficult.
Very difficult.
And you don't drink.
And I don't.
You don't drink.
I said that for the benefit of the Right Honourable Member for Centerville. But that's our job, to ensure that, you know, we know who to call and can facilitate what is required. What I have tried to say, and we still need to do some improvement on this, is when people make inquiries of the Foreign Service, to be able to answer them and to deal with their complaints in a timely fashion. People still complain the phone doesn't get answered, their correspondence isn't answered, and those kinds of things. So we have to work on those. The other aspect of our work, which is public work, is, of course, the Department of the Division of Protocol. And there are some arrangements which the Prime Minister expects to facilitate within the coming months to deal with the protocol division. Right now, we still have the work of Mr. Andrew McKinney as the consultant to the Ministry on protocol issues. But the division is headed pro tem by Mr. Terry Archer, who many of you will see at various public functions. So there's a lot of work which is done. And I'm very proud of the team we've assembled. The government has allowed us to recruit 5 persons a year, at least. And so we expect a new class to come in shortly. Some people will be going out on rotation shortly. And I want them, while they're overseas, Mr. Speaker, to know that they have the implicit support of the Bahamian government and the Bahamian people in the work which they do. And that is whether the leader of the opposition shows up or whether the Prime Minister shows up. They work for all of us without fear or favor. I hope that this act which we pass becomes landmark in the sense that it creates the next phase of the development started by all of those ministers that long time ago. From that early conversation that George Stewart and Pericles Malis had as 2 young officers when we became independent in 1973 to what it is now. They who sit in the gallery are the inheritors of the work of those men and women, 1973 post. Thank you to them. Thank you to my colleagues in the government for helping us move this forward to this point. And all that's left to say in the circumstances is I so move, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.